This is my journey. Inspired one story at a time, a library of leaders was created. It began as a journey to learn. As time went on, it began to grow. All it needed was a platform, and this podcast was created to listen, to inspire, to share. I am a storyteller, and this is my journey. Welcome to another episode of Profiles in Leadership. I'm your host, Steve Anderson, and our guest today is Dr. Bernie Mullin, who is a groundbreaking sport and entertainment industry executive who's turned around franchises, set all-time revenue and attendance records, and generated $1.5+ billion in revenues for brands from the NFL to the U.S. Open Tennis with his agency, Aspire Marketing Group. He was CEO of NBA and NHL teams and the CMO of the entire NBA. He's also a globally acclaimed speaker, podcaster, author, and humanitarian who has served on multiple boards, including the United Way, YMCA, and Make-A-Wish Foundation. The Aspire Difference Foundation focuses on supporting single parents with preschool children. All net proceeds from his consulting, podcasts, and books go to support the foundation, TADF. His new book is Reimagining America's Dream, Making It Attainable for All. So, Bernie, welcome to the program. It's great to have you on today.
Great to be on, Stephen. I really appreciate you giving me this opportunity.
Yeah, it's interesting. Usually I do a lot of guests, I say, well, just tell us a little bit about your history and give us some context to know where you're from. But if we did that after reading your book, I'm pretty sure we'd spend the whole time just you introducing yourself. So you've done so much. But let's just start by, I think you immigrated to the U.S. from Liverpool, England, right?
I did. Yeah. It starts with being 6 years old. One of my dad's and my mom's uncles, they immigrated to Canada from Liverpool as an 18-year-old. Worked in a cork factory in Montreal, Canada. It became the factory that supplied all the corks for Seagram's whiskey. The family had no kids. He inherited the business. And so he came over with his kids and grandkids and told me all about the streets paved with gold in North America. I didn't know the difference at that time between Canada and the USA. But then about 3 or 4 years later, my dad's cousin was VP for pharmaceuticals for Vicks, corporation, and he came over to build a factory in England to serve the needs in Europe. And he talked to me all about New York, grew up in the Bronx, the Yankees, and I was hooked. So at age
Yeah.
21, I came as a summer camp counselor to work up in Maine. And then I came back, the owner of that camp, and I hit it off. He gave me a scholarship. And I came to go to grad school in Kansas. And that was 52 years ago, Stephen, and I've never left.
Yeah, that's great. I'm just gonna, for those on the video, you can see the book here that you've written, Reimagining America's Dream. And in reading the book, that the introduction is pretty bleak. When you talk about things that you think have changed, and in the book you talk about how things, hopefully can get back to the way that you saw that they were as far as immigrants coming in and so on. We'll get to that later, but I just wanted to say that you really have lived the American dream.
We really have. I've been incredibly blessed, starting with the wonderful, warm-hearted people in the heartland of Kansas. Talk about falling in love with America, including all the people at the Camp Tacahoe up in Maine, who, particularly Morty Goldman, the owner of the camp, and it was a 8-week wealthy Jewish kids camp. The cabin was like all-star names. If I told you the 8 kids in the cabin, you'd know the last names of all of them. It was just an
Wow.
amazing experience. And so I've been so blessed with that. And I realize speaking English and America's love for England really helps. And I got the advantage a lot of other people have. But, I've worked hard. I studied hard. I got degrees. I think I've always given value back to the people that have employed me beyond what they paid me. and I've had success. And so I just want that for everybody in America. And I hate to see the toxicity that we've got going on right now with the extreme right going further right, extreme left going further left. And, the 65% of us, according to Pew Research, who sit in the middle, I'm an independent. Um, I just want us to do what's best for America and give everybody the opportunity that I've been given to have an incredible life for my kids and my grandkids.
Yeah, absolutely. You talk about in the book too, where you had a health scare. I think it was in your 20s. I think obviously you're determined and you work hard, and you kind of had that type A personality, and stress kind of got the better of you. So just tell us a little bit about what you learned from that experience.
I had terrible stomach pain, Stephen, and later learned it was ulcers. And so I went to the doctor at the KU Medical Center on campus. He says, "Tell me about your family history." I said, "Well, from what I understand, my grandfather was a dock worker back in the days of no unions. They showed up and they picked the top 10 or 15 guys. And my grandfather was Irish Catholic, so the Protestants running the docks weren't going to hire him, and he was also ill, So there were days he would walk home to a family of eight with no money, no food, you know. But Granddad had ulcers apparently in his 40s, had sugar diabetes in his 50s, and died of a heart attack in his early 60s. So they said, "Well, tell me about your dad." Well, my dad had ulcers in his 30s, sugar diabetes in his 40s, and died of a heart attack in his 50s. And the doctor looked at me like an idiot. He's like, "And
Yeah.
you're in your 20s." I'm like,
Yeah.
"Oh my God, yeah." So, what I did was number one was drop all the Coke I was drinking, that's Coca-Cola.
Yeah. Yeah.
The coffee I was drinking, and I changed. And I was type A. I'd play tennis once a month and expect to be Bjorn Borg in those days.
Yeah.
I mean, my how I spoke to myself was, "You stupid MF," and I learned to be kind to myself and be realistic, and still be a type A, high success, high achieving, but not so crazy.
Yeah. So your story continues then after that. You left Kansas and you went back to Boston and entered a program that was really kind of pioneer in the day, the University of Mass Sports Studies program. And it was one of the first of its kind. And so I think you had a soccer background and you were real intrigued to sports. And so you joined that program, a bit of a risk, only being the first or second one in the nation.
Well, it was the first sport business program in the nation, Stephen, and it was a risk. And it was, funnily enough, I mean, we'll get to immigration later, but you know, uh, obviously we started applying for a permanent residency, doing everything legally. And the Department of Labor in the state of Massachusetts was so slow in processing my work permit that by the time I applied to the Immigration and Naturalization Service, we were over time. And so the visa had run out. So my wife and I went there expecting to get our permanent visas. Instead, we were given 7 days notice to get out of the country.
Oh my
We
gosh.
got deported, not because of anything we'd done, with three American kids. And so when I look at immigration today and see millions of people coming in without the full documentation, I just shake my head and go, well, they weren't so kind to me back in those days. But anyway, we went and got a visa and got it all done. And, of course, now I've been a citizen for many years, very, very blessed. But so the way I mitigated the risk, when you think about leadership, was I insisted on an adjunct appointment in the School of Management, and it was the best thing I ever did because um, I hit it off with the School of Management. They said, "Hey, if this doesn't work with sports business, you can come over with us." We had George Odion, who'd done management by objectives. We had Kenny Blanchard, the 1 minute manager. They got a contract with Mike Dukakis as governor of Massachusetts to train every state employee, every manager in the state on performance management. And I was the schlep that went and got all the work, so I
Yeah.
I was the one that did all the training, which was fantastic. And it took us 10 years, and I was there 10 years to get the program out of the School of Phys Ed and create a sport management, sport business degree and get it into the School of Management. And, most recently, it's been voted by all the top world magazines as the best sport management program in the world. So I'm very
Yeah.
proud of that and appreciative of helping along that on the way.
Yeah, that's awesome. And when we look at all your accolades, I mean, it looks pretty rosy, but as you just said, you ran into one skid when you got deported, and then you also you talk about the winter from hell in 1977, 1978. So tell us what setbacks that gave you.
It was 28 inches of snow in one day. The blizzard in Boston that shook Boston down for 3 days. And I actually the snow plows in the western. I was in Amherst, so I was at UMass Amherst. So the snow plows cleared all the road. I went into work. There was nobody in work, no classes that day at the university. Um, but we had baseboard, electric baseboard heating in our chalet house, gorgeous house, but an energy nightmare, and in the woods. And basically, I bought a wood burning stove and had to put up a cheap metal asbestos pipe. The roof overhang, I had to cut through the roof, the wood of the roof, and about 30 inches of snow and ice with picks and everything else to be able to put the chimney through it. And the pickaxe stuck, and I was so mad. I'm like, and pull on the pickaxe, and I fell up 25 feet off the back of a ladder. But
Oh
thank
God.
God we had 4 feet of snow, and I didn't break my back. And
Yeah.
a great lesson from my father, who was a tough sergeant major in the army, sold life insurance, and I lay there crying, and got the dad's voice of don't be a wimp. The difference between a winner and a loser is the winner gets up one more time. Fall down 9 times, get up 10. And so I got up and bruised back, sore as hell. Didn't go to work the next day, but fixed the chimney, and finally we had a warm house, and it wasn't costing me an arm and a leg.
Yeah, awesome. And didn't you, was that the house that you almost lost? Somebody came in
Yeah,
and kind of helped you, right? So you had an
yeah, my mom.
angel. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
my
So,
my mother. We almost lost it because, we had a house in Kansas that hadn't sold. So we had a first and second mortgage on the house in Kansas. We had the house in Massachusetts. I'd borrowed money from the camp director, Morty Goldman, beautiful man who gave me the money to the deposit because we hadn't sold our house in Kansas. So the bank wouldn't give us a 90% mortgage. They'd only give us an 80% mortgage. And really, when you read the books on grit, and what I think is one of the biggest problems in our country today is we're not teaching kids grit. I mean, my ex-wife and I could easily have said, screw it, let the house go back, we go bankrupt, go rent a place, but we weren't going to do that. And it was really tough for 18 months, and
yeah,
thanks to the contract with the state of Massachusetts, I drove into Boston and Worcester or Pittsfield twice a week, did all day training programs, and they paid me $300 a day, so $600 extra a week, for 30 weeks of the academic year. It was $10,000. It allowed me to pay down all the bills of first and second mortgage in Kansas, mortgage in Massachusetts, car payment, and bill collectors calling all the time. And I think this whole idea of a participation trophy, it's not American. I mean,
yeah,
it sounds harsh, but I believe there's one winner, and when you finish second, you're the first loser, and you say, okay, how do I become the winner?
yeah,
That's America. That's how we've built the greatest nation on earth. And I've lived in Europe, grew up in Europe, lived and worked in 11 different countries. And this is the greatest country. There's a reason why people are willing to die to get into this country, and why we got God knows how many immigrants, 2.5, 3 million at least, came in through the southern border last year alone, who want to live here. Yeah, we
yeah,
got warts. We got to fix the warts. Still the greatest country on earth, in
yeah,
my
yeah.
opinion.
That's amazing. And you went from there to, I think you stated too, in the mid 1980s, you were making 5 times more money than your dad had ever made, which,
Yeah.
was I'm sure something to look at from your perspective. And then you had an opportunity to become the senior vice president with the Pittsburgh Pirates. Again, you ran into a little bit of a glitch where they couldn't give you the job, so you took on a project, again, a huge risk, and then had a great career with the Pittsburgh Pirates.
It was, it was interesting. I mean, uh, what happened was the Pirates wanted a new senior VP of business, run all the business side, and we were the worst team in baseball by far, losing 100 games, 7 players in the federal grand jury, drug trials. The Pittsburgh Pirate mascot was the drug pusher and supplier.
Oh,
It
geez.
couldn't get
Yeah.
worse. In my first year there, our payroll was 10.1 million, 6.3 million of that to players that didn't play for us, paying
Oh,
Lee
good.
Mazzilli, millions to go play for the Mets and beat us. It was crazy.
Yeah.
So but it was an incredible experience, and so I interviewed there, and imagine there's 14 corporations, the top corporations in Pittsburgh are owning the Pirates, along with 50% owned by the local stadium urban development district through the mayor, and so you got Vince Sonny of PPG, Paint and Glass, chairman of the, is one of the interviewers. Tommy O'Brien runs PNC Bank. Paul O'Neill, who later became the treasurer of the United States, is the chairman of Alcoa. That's who my bosses were. And so the resources was unbelievable. But they're like, hey, you're a professor. How the hell are we going to hire you? And so I said, give me a project. And the project was season ticket plans. And they were screwed up. They were all overlapping. They were mutually exclusive. They were the wrong plans. The smallest season ticket plan was 41 games. Made no sense. So I do 10 games, 5 games, flex books, 11 coupons to get you into a game for 11 coupons for the price of 10, free hot dog, free Coke, 25% off merchandise. And eventually, 6 years later, we're selling 25,000 flex books, 250,000 tickets through
Yeah.
something that I created and invented. And it was all through market research. So when I did the project and presented it to them, they said, chairman of the board, wonderful man, Mac Prine says, would you mind stepping out for a few minutes? I'm thinking, oh God, I've really screwed up. And I come back a few minutes
Yeah.
later, he says, we'd like to offer you the job.
Yeah, awesome. So you were
You
there
know,
for 6 years, and
yeah.
most people think that'd be the pinnacle of a career, and you're doing great. And I hope I can ask you this question, but with your kind of type A personality and your hard drive and your grit, and now you've got this great job. Do you look back at that time? Sometime was the sacrifice too much because you did lose your first marriage, and so do you look at it of just too hard charging there? Well, how do you look back on that time?
Much so. It's a great question, without a shadow of a doubt, Stephen. And it's very, very truthful. I look back at it and it's, I think part of my personality is when I look back, I don't look back. And that's a mistake. So I do look back and go, and my mother taught me this as a young child. We lived on a major highway. It was the major arterial highway with all the trucks coming into the docks of Liverpool. And when I was a kid, Liverpool was the biggest, busiest port in the world. It's not anymore, but it was then. Um, and we had a big sidewalk and we'd play games there. And when one of the kids, Monica, was very noisy, and my mother hated disturbing the neighbors. So the door would open and go, Bernard, and you get the finger.
Yeah.
Oh God. But I wasn't making the noise. Get in. And so you got in. And if I resisted too long, I got a clip on the back of the head, which was tough love in those days. Today, you'd be, sent to jail. But and mom would say, look at your hand. When you're pointing your finger, she said, there's 3 fingers pointing back at yourself. Always look at yourself. So I've been good at looking back and going, okay, what could I have done better? What could I have done differently? But never look back with regret. So Um, I regret that my marriage broke up, but quite honestly, it's the old Zig Ziglar joke, Stephen. I should have put my wedding ring on a different finger, because it's on the airplane. He goes, "You got your wedding ring on the wrong finger," and the guy goes, "Could have married the wrong woman." So I mean, God bless her. She's an amazing woman, mother of my three kids. We were wrong for each other, and she's the
Yeah.
one that figured it out. So thank God for that. So I had the experience of being a single parent, which is an amazingly frightening experience and challenging experience. It's why when I started the Aspire Difference Foundation, I made it focus on single parents, with preschool kids, because that is so challenging. And I was making six figures, and
Yeah.
I was able to find a good nanny. So God knows for a teenage pregnant girl how frightening it could be. So I
Excellent.
think I learned a lot from it. I worked for two different bosses, one of whom, Malcolm Prime, was the district attorney for Columbus, Ohio, CEO of NV Ryan Homes. And I said, Mac, when you're not there for make a decision, what do you want me to do? He said, always make a decision of what's in the best long-term interest for the Pittsburgh Pirates. So it was
Mhm.
easy to know what decision to make. And he empowered me to make those decisions. He got
Yeah.
in a fight with our general manager, Sid Thrift, and he resigned to allow them to keep Sid Thrift, who lasted maybe another 8 or 9 months. That was about it, because he was let's just say, an interesting character.
Yeah.
Um, the guy that replaced him was the managing director of the largest law firm in Western Pennsylvania, Eastern Ohio, Eckert Siemens. And Carl was a compromiser. So I asked him the same question, and he goes, I'll make the decisions for you. I said, well, how the hell can I make a decision? I mean, that doesn't make any sense. And what it was at that point in time, whatever was biggest expedience for his law firm, because most of our 14 owners were their clients. And
Okay.
that's what it boiled
Yeah.
down to. And it was
Yeah.
so wrong. And he allowed one of them to constantly call me every day to try and tell me what to do. So
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
why I left. So
Yeah.
great learning. Don't look back with regret. Things I certainly did wrong, things I certainly learned from. And probably the
Yeah.
biggest thing I learned from was assuming everything I wrote in my sport marketing book was automatically accurate. We had a contest we did with Giant Eagle Grocery Markets, million entries for the Giant Eagle Home Run Sweepstakes contest. You fill out a blank at the store. If your name's called out, we hit a home run in that inning, you get groceries free for a month. If a grand slam's hit, you get groceries free for a year.
Oh,
So
wow.
we
Yeah.
took those million entries, reduced them down to 400,000, did a direct mail piece that cost a couple of $100,000 to mail out to everybody, and we sold no tickets, Stephen. None, none. I thought I was going to get fired.
Oh boy.
So my executive assistant gets our service group. They call many of these people. Most of them are little old ladies in Du Bois, Pennsylvania, listening to the radio broadcast of the Pirates. They're not going to buy tickets, but they did buy hats, scarves, jerseys for their kids and their grandkids. So we sent them the brochure at Thanksgiving, and we sold over $1 million worth of merchandise. I kept my job.
Oh, that's good. And then I think you went on to Miami. Was that the next stop?
Now, from there was the Rockies.
Oh, the Rockies. Okay, so you
Yeah.
went, yeah, you went to Denver and worked there for a while, and that didn't turn out good either, right? You had a
Well,
hiccup there.
it turned out great from the point of view of the 3 years to prep and build the team, and we broke every record for every sports team worldwide. 4.483 million fans for a season is by far the biggest ever in the history of sports worldwide. And we built a good team. I worked for owners who, the first owners were the guys behind oh gosh, I've forgotten the name of the it was the big box store that competed with Walmart, Farmore.
Okay.
And Mickey Monis, the chairman, was done for bilking 300 million, biggest white collar fraud in the history of America at the time, went to jail for 13 years. Um, and because, I mean, even though, there was never any question about my integrity, that was a problem with some of the ownership group. The biggest problem was they'd hired as executive VP John McHale, whose father had been president of a couple of Major League Baseball teams, and Bob Gebhardt as general manager. Gebhardt pushed John McHale out of his role. And so John McHale was sitting there with nothing to do. So they made him my boss. And I said, no offense, John, and John said, hey, I'm not staying, don't worry. But then he did. So then and I realized, and then the owner of the Rockies was a tremendous reference for me, ironically, later on, said great things about what I'd done. But he introduced me to our minor league owner, David Elmore, who owned the Colorado Springs Sky Sox. And he wanted to put a professional hockey team in Denver. Now, it was 10 years since the NHL had quit. Great trivia question. What was their name? Colorado Rocky Hockey. And they had gone and become the New Jersey Devils Hockey Club. So 10 years, no pro hockey in Denver. We bring back the Denver Grizzlies. We do so well. We draw almost 13,000 fans a game, make millions of dollars of profit. We win the trophy, and 11 out of the 12 trophies the league had to offer did fantastically well. And why did I do that? David Elmore convinced me. He said, look, if you want to be a GM of a major league team, you need to run the sports side, not just the business side. And I'd run the business side with the Pirates and the Rockies, but not the team side. So I
Mm,
ran the hockey side, and we were tremendously successful.
yeah.
But then the Avalanche moved into Denver, and I'm out of work. I helped move the team to Salt Lake City, where it still is. Um, and I get this fantastic opportunity at the University of Denver to take a Division II athletic program to Division I. First thing you got to do is make it gender equitable, which is not easy. A lot of people don't understand what that means in college athletics, but equal money, equal scholarships, equal time and use of facilities. And the student body was 51% female, 51% of your student athletes had to be female. But we did it. Um, and since then, they have won 16 national championships, and there's something called the Learfield Cup, one AAA, which is non-football. They won that 14 out of the 15 times.
Wow.
So
Wow.
very, very proud of that, Stephen,
Yeah.
and worked with an
Yeah.
amazing chancellor, a visionary guy in Daniel Ritchie.
Yeah. Yeah. You mentioned in the book that his influence on you to developing those minority leadership roles was real impactful.
Very much so. I mean, Dan Ritchie was a special guy. Harvard undergrad, Harvard grad, almost quit Harvard MBA program, says it wasn't challenging enough. Stockbroker, for I forget the name of the family now, but Paramount Pictures. He got hired as the executive vice president of Paramount Pictures. Tells a story of Marlon Brando while filming Pirates of Penzance, and Brando won't show up. He's got this young love interest of one of the cast. So he's staying in the beach condo that the movie studio's renting for him instead of showing up film. And Dan with his three-piece suit shows up in somewhere in the Caribbean, and says,
Yeah.
you're back to work this afternoon or I'll throw you out of this condo. And he was a
Yeah.
very mild man, he still is beautiful man. And he had a date with Marilyn Monroe. And he told me the story of one date with Marilyn Monroe was enough to know that she didn't have any room in her life for anybody other than herself.
Yeah. I'm sure. And what?
Fascinating.
And while you were in Denver too, maybe this started your feelings about America and what's going wrong or whatever. The Columbine tragedy was right in your neighborhood.
It was literally,
Yeah.
my kids all went to Chatfield, which was the rival and adjacent school to Columbine. Plenty of their friends were at Columbine. Plenty of my adult friends' kids were at Columbine. Terrible, terrible experience, without a shadow of a doubt, Stephen. And awful. We went when Al Gore came in and did the one of the ceremonies, to acknowledge just the tragedy. And you saw the cars of the kids that had died, with flowers all over them, that gone driven to school that day and never to drive again. It was
Wow.
horrible, shocking experience, that we just couldn't believe. And of course, re-upped, a few years later when I'm in New York with the NBA, when I was in Manhattan the day of 9/11.
Yeah, yeah. Those are just the times in history that we can't ever forget because they're so profound. Yeah,
We must never forget them,
yeah,
and we the biggest thing is not about forgetting them or not, although that's important to me. I think we've got to learn the lessons from them.
yeah,
The
yeah,
lesson of high school isolating these kids. Now, maybe they were strange, maybe they were different from everybody else, but so what? I mean, I don't think I'm average or typical or my interests are the same as everybody else's, but I don't think my interests or, how I view the world is any more important or right or correct than anybody else's. We've got to learn to listen. We've got to learn to listen with understanding. And I think, when you talk about your podcast being all about leadership, it's the greatest thing with leadership is when we'll eventually get to the Aspire group, but when building the
yeah,
Aspire group, how did we have the success we had? We're a sales and marketing company with the industry that has the highest turnover. Over half of your staff turnover in the first year and terribly low retention rates. And we had over 90% of our leaders staying. Average tenure of our leaders was 12 years in our 16-year history. And keeping high 60% of entry level beginning people sales where the job was smile and dial. Pick up a phone, stick it in your ear, and make 100 calls a day. And how did we do that? Because we listened to people and we insisted our managers knew who our people were and where they wanted to go in their career. And they realized their job as a manager was to help people get where they want to go. The Zig Ziglar philosophy. You can get whatever you want in this life if you help enough other people get what they want.
yeah, yeah. That's a great lesson. Now, there's just so many pieces of your history that I want to bring up, but I also want to get to your ideas for the future as well. It did intrigue me that then you ended up in Miami for a while working for the Marlins, and then
No, no, no,
no,
no, no. Then I went from there to New York to work for
didn't.
David Stern.
Oh, okay,
Yeah, the
okay.
Marlins were our big rivals with the Rockies, but
Uh,
never worked for the Marlins.
Never worked for
No,
them.
I went to New York Stern for one of the toughest MFers you've ever
Yeah,
met in your life in David Stern. Brilliant, best commissioner, but one tough mother.
yeah, yeah. That's so interesting. So, and then so you worked with a commissioner of the NBA for a while, and then you eventually ended up in Atlanta and being the CEO of not only the Atlanta Hawks, but also the hockey team Thrashers, correct?
Correct.
And that's got to, I mean, one job being a CEO is pretty big, but having two, that's got to be tough.
Well, it was two major league teams and the venue. I
Yeah,
mean, the general manager of the venue, the Phillips Arena, as it was in those days, now State Farm Arena, Bob reported to me as well. So we had all three entities. They were losing $47 million combined. Most of that lost by the hockey team, and we got it turned
yeah,
around to losing just 13 million. And basketball hadn't been in the playoffs for 8 years. We got them back to the playoffs, and within a year or two, they went to the conference final for the first time in their history. The hockey team had never had a winning season. We won the division. So it was a great experience from that point of view, Stephen. But not we had 9 owners who hated each other. They were in three groups. There was a Boston group, a Washington D.C. group, an Atlanta group, and the Atlanta and D.C. group ganged up to get rid of the Boston guy, who they got rid of about 3 years after I left. After 4 years, I stayed there. So 7 years they got rid of him, and then the Boston and the Atlanta group started fighting,
yeah. Oh gosh.
and then they pushed the Washington group out, and then eventually they got new owners come in. So that's when I started my own business. I finally
Yeah,
said, making rich people richer and they don't appreciate it. I've done enough of that. I'll build my own business. And in 16 years, we did $1.5 billion of revenue for 300 clients. And like you said in the intro, the NFL, US Open tennis, open golf, clients all over the place, pro teams, a lot of colleges, and very satisfying work. And, I was able to, quite frankly, fire some clients because they were,
yeah,
hate to say it on the air, but they were assholes.
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
were they were not good people to work with, didn't appreciate what we had to offer and how we could help grow revenue for them. So we said, it's going to be fun. And we had a no a-hole rule across all our employees as well. We had about 7 of them that we identified in that time that ruined our culture and chemistry. And we asked them politely to move on to the next happiness.
Yeah. It's really interesting in reading and listening to your story. You had a lot of cachet, at that stage of your career, but yet you took a big risk to walk away from it, so to speak, and start your own business. So obviously it paid off, but a lot of people would have stayed or kept doing what they're doing.
Yeah, I mean, because I went to David Stern and David offered me the job to come back, as senior VP, chief marketing officer, of the league, and I thanked him and said no. And then David called my wife the next day. Classic David, wouldn't you like to come back to New York? I'd love to have Bernie back. He's so gracious and an
Yeah.
amazing guy. I mean, David was a guy that you had to go through the baptism of fire, but once you went through the baptism of fire, you were his guy. And he screamed at me in front of all my staff and peers on one occasion. And I followed him down to his office and he goes, in the car, what do you want? I'm like, David, you and I need to talk. I've heard enough. I said, you haven't heard enough. If you want me to stay in this job, you'll give me 5 minutes.
Good for you.
you
Good
know
for you.
and
Yeah.
and I told him the story of washing my dad's car at 8 years old when he was doing his life insurance paperwork and him coming in and finished your car, sir. Are you sure? Under the doors, under the bumper. Oh, yes, 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 yes. And of course I hadn't washed under the bumper, so he grabbed my head and rubbed my nose in the dirt under the bumper. And I never ever failed to wash under the bumper or under the doors ever again. Now that was tough love. Today, like I said before,
Yeah.
you'd be in jail.
Yeah.
But I said, David, the spitting and scream doesn't get to me. If I'm not doing what you want me to do, tell me. And
Yeah.
he goes, anything else? I said, no. He said, have a nice day. I said, you too, David. And from then on, he didn't scream or holler at me
Yeah.
in front of other people. He did one-on-one, but what a
Yeah.
great learning. And like I said, took a league that was drug infested. The NBA finals were tape delayed when he
Mm.
took over as commissioner. And
Yeah.
look at it now, arguably the best marketed league in the world and greatest athletes. And he promised the union and all the players, you will be the highest paid athletes of any league in the world. And they are.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's jump in now to part two of the book. Really talks about your ideas that, if I can summarize, it's like you were afforded this wonderful opportunity in America to learn and grow and make your own thing and be successful and make money and all that, and you're concerned that we're losing it. So, tell us a little bit about, one of the things that came out to me was kind of this income inequality is really getting out of hand. So, you're in that very upper echelon of income, and so how do we bring those that aren't up?
Yeah, no, it's a great question and it's a fundamental question. I think that leads to the division we have. Um, Let me sidestep it for a second to put it in
Sure.
context. A couple of years ago, I was on a plane from Toronto, done work with the Canadian Soccer League, flying back to Denver, and was sat next to a member of Parliament for Canada. And I told him I was writing a book and a variety of different topics, and one was America's World Cup. And this is context for the solutions we're recommending. And I said, we've got to stop being the World Cup. And this guy who was a liberal politician on Trudeau's party for Peterborough in Toronto, wonderful man. He says to me, if America's not the World Cup, who would be?
Hmm.
And I'm like, I don't know. He goes, China, Russia. He said, we have no choice. America is going to always have to be the World Cup. And in that responsibility to the World Cup, as I see it, is it's physician heal thyself. If we're going to tell other countries how to be democratic and get involved with the billions of dollars that we spent, in for the war in Iraq, the war in Afghanistan, the funding we've given to Israel and Gaza, the funding we're giving to Ukraine to fight Russia, I think what we need to do is heal ourselves. So let's focus on the warts we've got and solve them. I think then the world starts to listen to us better than
Hmm.
us being preachy. And it starts with equality. And again, it's equality and equity. And, some of the political candidates for presidency are talking about this. And I used to teach in a graduate class, Stephen, at UMass, and put up there, and the kids, the undergrads had come from Amherst College, Harvard, great academic institutions. We had 25 places with 250 applicants. So we got the creme de la creme. Equity, equality. What's the difference? I guarantee you, it's one of those late night shows. Go out in the streets of Manhattan at Times Square, ask people what equity and equality is. They don't know what the difference is
Hmm.
you know and so let's start with equality. There's a false promise a premise, excuse me, in America that we're all equal. Yes, we're equal. I believe in God, so for me it's under the side of God. We're all equal. We're all but we're not all given the same gifts. We're all different. You and I are different. My family's different. They're all different. 3 kids and a stepchild. They're all different. So this idea of equality versus equity, which is I put in 80% of the ownership of and the investment in a company, I am entitled to 80% of the net proceeds of the value increase of the enterprise when I sell it and of the profit. Okay, so really, what we need to do is build a system that gives everybody equal opportunity to use the gifts they're given to the maximum advantage.
Hmm.
And that's quite different. So let's start off with income. Let's take our foundation focused on, interestingly enough, a lot of granddads, who are now, and grandparents who are inheriting their grandkids to raise them. But a lot of single parent, teenage pregnant moms is who we're serving here in Colorado and back in Georgia with our foundation. And what do they need? They need a national minimum wage that is at least 15 bucks an hour and way higher in many cities. Denver, it's $27 minimum wage that we pay the staff, my old company, the Aspire Group, because I sold it a year and a half ago. They get paid $30,000, $38,000 minimum base pay. So we start with that. And that makes a massive difference where I don't necessarily agree with either of the politicians on everything. Don't agree with several of them on a lot of things. But where I do agree is we should have people that can live and pay their bills on one job
Yeah.
with one kid, not necessarily 4 or 5 kids. So I
Yeah.
believe in that, and that starts there. And I think that's where we start. And overwhelmingly in America, it is poor people with less quality education that are at the toughest, they have the toughest life. And I think if we can start there, and we did it with my business, so we raised our minimum wage nationwide. So in Toledo, Ohio, those kids are getting 22,000. Now they get $28,000 as a base pay. And
Mm.
and then they'll get 10, 15,000 commission on top of it working for our company. And so I know as a business owner, it's hard. And we had to get our clients, our pro teams, our college athletic programs to agree to reimburse us at that higher level. And we did based
Yeah.
based on fairness.
Yeah. And that's the next step too that you talk about in the book too, is how the youth education is such a key. That investing in education and paying teachers and putting funds towards that education, in your opinion, I think is the key, right?
Yeah, it is. And I'm a storyteller in case you couldn't guess already.
Oh yeah, I love storytellers. So am I.
Yeah. And but people remember the stories, and when they remember the story, they remember the concept or the philosophy behind it, is my belief. Um and and so that's how I come across on it. And so the story is Niam. So um my eldest daughter, three kids, and they're all Irish, Celtic names. Her husband is of English extraction. He's American, but his parents were English and French. So Naim is 7 years old. My daughter is a doctor in Chinese medicine. She goes to get a master's degree in China with her now husband, who had American, who'd lived in China for 25 years at that time, all told 33 years in China, getting his doctorate in Chinese medicine. So they throw her into a Chinese school. She speaks no Mandarin. The kids are coming up to her and, looking at her eyes because she's a round eye, which is
Yeah.
how the Chinese refer to us.
Mhm.
And and she freaks out after 3 days of not being able to relate to being the only Caucasian kid. And well, she's actually her dad was African American, so um, they realize that's not the way to go. What's the analogy? The analogy is today, we're taking kids that come from poor homes where, the mom's doing two jobs to try and make ends meet. Dinner is McDonald's Monday, Domino's Tuesday, out of a can from a food desert on Wednesday. It doesn't cut it. There's no sit and cuddle and read a book. So the whole concept of our foundation and of the book is we must get kids into kindergarten able to read, write, and do basic math and be socialized to take direction from a teacher and to socialize with their peers to get along.
Mhm.
The research study shows that by third grade, if you're not reading at third grade level, you are 5 times more likely to commit crimes, go to jail, be involved in teenage pregnancy, be involved in substance abuse, whether drugs or alcohol, or other social disorders. So, the whole concept of universal free preschool starting at 3 months, 6 months, whatever the educators say makes the most sense, is absolutely vital to the future of America, and it pays for itself in 10 years by reducing all of the money that we're spending in all those different social programs.
Yeah. Yeah. And then you also have a idea that high school students should graduate from high school with $25,000 in their bank accounts by doing jobs and being paid, and so that they have a head start, a chance to get rolling.
Absolutely. And, I think, the podcasts I've done like this one, Stephen, the greatest feedback is one of our, look at Congress again, contextual analogy. All these old guys, the Tip O'Neills and the Ronald Reagans, who used to go to an Irish pub, have a great big steak, way too much to drink, and then agree on what they would agree on to keep our country moving, because they all had military or World War II experience, that common experience. We've lost that because we got rid of conscription 2 years before. Same in America as England growing up for me. 2 years before I would have gone to military boot camp. So the recommendation starts with rising freshmen before they go into high school would go to an 8-week sleepaway boot camp put on at one of these mothball military camps or government facility. Every state has them. 8 weeks, you get paid minimum wage, and it is how to be an adult and how to be an American. It's John F. Kennedy's ask not what your country can do for you, what you can do for it. You get up early in the morning, you exercise. Every other day, you're cooking either breakfast, lunch, or dinner. You're prepping the food. So you come away with 8 weeks, eight breakfasts, 8 lunches, 8 dinners, an experience of prepping food to come back to your home. You've come away with living with black, brown, yellow, and white kids, rich, poor, medium, doesn't matter. You've learned to get along. You've talked about these issues at a very impressionable age, and you've pocketed 5 grand. We'll then go, and my history in sports, I know how to go to the banks and say, you've got to give these kids no cost to their checking, until they're pick a age, 30, 25, whatever you want. Okay. And you're going to give them 7.5% interest on money they leave in the bank account. We're going to teach these kids how to save, and realizing that some of the poorest families are going to have to draw on some of the money. But if they can save most of that money, it's 5 grand. And then sophomore, junior, and senior year, they go to work, and they work in a business in one of those years. They work in a government agency in one of those years. They work in a not-for-profit or charitable organization. So by the time they're 18, they got 20,000 in base pay with that compound interest, $25,000. And we've created generational wealth in these families in half a generation that there's never
Mhm.
been there before. So they
Yeah.
can then buy an apartment, they can then invest in their own entrepreneurial business, whatever they want. And if they've done those 4 years in good standing, we'll then give them $15,000 a year times 4 years, or whatever the cost of living is at that time for room, board, and books and tuition to a state in-state school. Okay, so it's free college or professional degree. It'd be about barber, beautician, plumber, electrician, jobs that we really need. Again, free, no student debt in, starting from scratch at zero in 25 years, we've totally turned around the youth of our country by investing in the youth of our country. And the payback in increased GDP, productivity, reduction in crime, social issues, and all the funding for those programs is massive ROI. So, as a business leader, as a government leader, as a politician, and that's the cutting edge of where I'm working right now. I'm working with Senator James Coleman, who's the Senate president of the Colorado State Senate, and our state senators and our governors to try and have Colorado and other states be prototype on this program, and start it off slowly
Yeah.
but surely. And
No,
and
it
it's
sounds
it's a
sounds
massive
real.
investment in youth,
Yeah.
Stephen, but it's so needed, I believe.
And it sounds really interesting. And then it also includes after school, activities. So the kids aren't going home and sitting in an apartment by themselves and whatever that they're
Right.
doing other
Yeah.
things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Free
Yeah.
latchkey kid babysitting. One
Yeah.
in five American kids currently, according to statistics, are going home to an empty house,
Yeah.
for the temptation to be recruited into a gang, and the four pillars of our foundation that I think are so important, the Aspire Difference Foundation for um, single caregivers. Number one is mental health of the caregiver, which post COVID is massive problem.
Hmm.
Number two, safe, secure house. Somewhere not in the hood. The kids can go out and play in the street, and the kids are not being recruited as drug mules at 7 or 8 years old by the gangs and later on be a gang member. Number three, the quality of life of that child. Exercise, healthy food, healthy lifestyle. Have a parent that if you think of a teenage pregnant girl, and she now gets $30,000 base pay with a minimum wage. She gets ten to $15,000 of benefit for the preschool. She's got 40,000 bucks. She can live with one child, on
Yeah.
one job. Massive,
Mhm.
massive difference. And then finally is the preschool education. So until we get universal preschool, we're paying for educational materials for that child. And our measurability of our success of our foundation is how many of the kids that we've supported go into kindergarten able to read and write the alphabet, write basic sentences, and do 1 + 2 = 3.
Yeah. Well, there's so much to talk about, but we're kind of running out of time here. So let me just
I
say on the
understand.
healthcare side of things, you believe in kind of a hybrid system. So everyone, everyone should have some form of healthcare, and much like the European models, you can, if you have the money and want to, buy something more on top of that, then that's fine. But we should have universal healthcare as well for everybody.
Absolutely. I mean, that's what I grew up with, so that's why I understand. I hate
Yeah.
seeing homeless people having their foot amputated because they
Yeah.
didn't go and get health care. They had diabetes or whatever that might be going on for them. And my own son was worked for Vail Associates, and so for 5 months a year he was assistant golf pro, and for 5 months a year he was a ski instructor. And they separated the jobs and gave him no health benefits, and he
Yeah.
was an extreme skier, competing in to get into the X Games. Broke his sternum, broke his arm in four places. I mean, just terrible injuries. Well, if it hadn't been for Dad paying the hospital bills, he would have had a horrendous death. And
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
makes no sense. And I think the most compelling thing is the Office of Management budget. If we were to believe their projections, and I do in this particular case, we will save 3 billion a year by going to that hybrid system over what's being paid by right now by the companies and by the individuals. My own company, the Aspire Group, with these young people right out of college selling tickets, smiling and dialing. we gave them 100% covered health, dental, and vision. 100% covered, which is about $280 per person, but they're all young guys. They don't ever go to the doctor unless they've broken their arm playing basketball, you
Yeah,
know?
yeah,
So, I mean, and yeah, we had some young women, but tough to get the young women to come into ticket sales. But, where there's usually a higher expense. But our profile for the health insurance premium was pretty cheap, but it was a $500,000 a year we spent, but money
yeah,
well spent. And
yeah.
so I think universal health care, everybody has it, make a huge difference in this country. And then those that can afford and choose to elect to have a higher standard of care
Right.
if they want.
Right. And then in just a very short time, because we are running out of time, I would be remiss if I didn't ask you about immigration. We can all agree that our immigration policies are crazy and not working. Um, but I do think you say in the book too that with immigration, we need to celebrate the differences. Let's not try and make everybody the same. We're not the same. We're different. We bring different things to the table. So instead of trying to get everybody to conform to a certain way, we celebrate the differences. We just need to have a system that allows them to come in legally.
The immigration system is broken. There is no two ways about it. It's broken. And then this is not, a bitter immigrant who went through hell to get here, to get a permanent residence and then citizenship. It's not that at all. This is the greatest country on earth. There are millions of people that want to come here, and we need many of them, some of them. And the two obvious places that I mentioned in the book on the high end, how I got my working visa was the job required someone who had played or coached at the pro or college level and had a PhD in business. And I was the only person that applied for the job at UMass that had those qualifications. It's the only way I got in. And
Yeah.
it took Senator Ted Kennedy calling the head of the Department of Labor in Massachusetts to say, tell your people to stop screwing around. University of Massachusetts needs this guy, wants this guy, get him his bloody work permit. And that's what happened to get in there. So on the top end, aliens of distinguished merit and ability is what I got in through. We need those in AI and all these other high-tech fields, medical fields, scientific fields. Need them. And then we need people to be chambermaids, agricultural workers. Give them a bloody work permit. Why would you allow 2.5 million people, at the southern border alone, and they're the only ones that you process, in a year? Allow them in with court dates of 2026 for their asylum hearings and no work permit. I live in Denver, Colorado, 2 blocks east of my house on Colorado Boulevard at Leetsdale and all the other main streets. There are groups of Venezuelans, guys, overwhelmingly, once in a while, a wife with little kids there for the sympathy, and they're coming up to you when you pull up at the red traffic light to wash your windshield. God bless them. And I wind my window down and go, welcome, hola, ¿cómo estás? No gracias. I don't need my windshield washed. Here's $10. Here's $20. You know, how can we help you get a job? And of course, they don't speak English well enough. My Spanish is not good enough, but it's crazy what we're doing. They
Yeah.
want to work. I understand the presidential candidates talking about Aurora and the apartment complex and the gangs. True story. Definitely happened. Limited number of apartment complexes. One is too many. I understand, but let's not take it out of proportion. The criminal element within the immigrant population is bad, but it's way less than the criminal element in our domestic population. So, uh,
Yeah.
you
Isn't that
know,
interesting? Yeah.
I mean, let's put it in perspective and let's not make all immigrants terrible people. I like to think
Yeah.
I've made this world a better place. I like to think that my 4 kids and 6 grandkids and their partners are great Americans who are focused on making the world a better place, Stephen. And I like to think that me being allowed to come in along with my ex-wife and live here and become American is the greatest blessing I ever received. The book is about me being so grateful about that, but it's how do we make it available to everybody so that America can be the World Cup and speak from the point of view of We don't have some of these horrible aberrations that we've had, like George Floyd and some of those other things, but that we have an honest discourse because Michael Brown in St. Louis, um, there was an inquest done under the auspices of a black president and a black attorney general that basically said the cop did no wrong. And yet today we have these protests where they go, hands up, don't shoot. Supposedly the words of Michael Brown completely debunked in the inquest to his
Yeah.
death. But nobody puts reality in here. So neither side is 100% right, neither side's 100% wrong. Talk, listen, listen to understand, and come together with some common sense solutions that makes the
Yeah.
world and the American world a better place for everybody, particularly those marginalized, poor, less quality educated.
Well, and I think you said it earlier, we just need more. I think a majority of the people do have moderate views and can see both sides of an issue and whatever. The problem is they can't get elected. You got to be way left or way right to hit the base. So, maybe you ought to run for office. Have you thought of that?
No, because as a
Yeah.
foreigner, I can't run.
Yeah.
I could run
Yeah.
for some offices, but not for
Yeah.
president. And you're absolutely right. But the reality, Stephen, is that according to Pew Research, 65% of Americans sit in the middle.
Yeah.
They're either moderate left, moderate right, or independents like me in the middle, but they have warm hearts. There's nobody more generous than America. We have disasters in this country, and the rest of the world is not sending checks to our charities. We have
Yeah.
disasters around the globe, and Americans are sending checks or wiring money.
Yeah.
So like I said, I think I'm a fiscal conservative with a warm heart and a social conscience, and want to see America come back together as it
Yeah.
was when I arrived, with a warm-hearted Kansans who embraced me and said, "Welcome.
Yeah.
You belong here," and that I'll never forget that.
Well, Bernie, at this time in the interview, I always ask my guests the same common question. So that question is, in relation to leadership, what is a pearl of wisdom you could leave us with today?
The pearl of wisdom is, as a leader, you don't have to know the answers. You better know some of them, but you
Yeah.
don't have to know all of the answers. But you do need to know really good questions.
Yeah.
David
Amen.
Stern was brilliant at what I call the third level question. So he'd ask you a question. Yeah, David Stern allowed me to spend $15 million of the NBA's money in building the ultimate fan database through just simple questions. Okay. So, what's the fan database? Everybody in the world interested in basketball was a scout, social media, yada, yada, yada. Okay. How do you get all that information? We start with the ticket buyers. We go to Ticketmaster. We go to the ticketing software companies of all 30 teams. We get access to the team's data, put it in a database, clean, enhance it, dedupe it, expand on that data, give that back to the teams. The teams will be willing to give us that data. Okay. So
Yeah.
those are the second and third level questions he asked. How would it work? What would it cost? Da 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 da.
Yeah.
So understand that, but then be like David Stern. And he didn't like it when I told him, I said, David, you're the guy that created the NBA. Remember, he took over with a drug infested league with the finals were not live on TV, right?
Yeah.
And so he says, "What do you mean, Mullen?" And I said, "NBA stands for nothing but accountants and nothing but attorneys, David, because you said, yes, build this $15 million database, right? But I now have to go with all the accountants and build a really tight, thoughtful, insightful, and accurate business plan that the accountants will sign off on. And then I have to go to all the lawyers and get all the contracts and all the agreements with Ticketmaster, with our teams to get that database, with Adidas, to get and New Era Cap and all the other retailers to get them to give me the information. So when you buy an NBA jersey, there's a hang tag on it. If you go online and register, I've captured your information and I give you some financial incentive to do that. I have to put all that together. That's my pearl of wisdom
Yeah.
is ask know how to ask really insightful, deep questions.
Very well said. Well, Bernie, this has been a real pleasure. You're a wealth of knowledge. You got a lot of wisdom. Your story is definitely one of those wonderful, great stories to read and understand. Appreciate your time today. We learned a lot, and thanks for sharing it with us.
Thank you so much, Stephen. I'm blessed that it's become a bestseller
Yeah,
book, 5 star, Amazon, Barnes and Noble,
yeah.
Kobo, or your local bookstore. Um, Hopefully, it'll change the world. And like I said, next step is working with the politicians to get them to adopt some of these as policies, and in various states, beta test them and see if we can improve the model. So,
Well,
thank you for the exposure. Thank you
yeah.
for what you do in terms of your podcast every day.
Okay. Thanks so much, Bernie. Take care, and I hope I run into you down the road.
I'm sure I will. You take
Okay.
care. Thanks,
Bye
Stephen.
bye. Bye bye.
Bye now.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Profiles in Leadership. To listen to all my interviews, subscribe to Profiles in Leadership with Steve Anderson on Apple Podcasts, iTunes, and many other popular podcast platforms. Some of these interviews are on video, and you can search YouTube for Profiles in Leadership with Steve Anderson. You can also access the entire library of interviews on my website, orange.coaching.com, and that is orangetheword.coaching.com, and go to the Media Center and click on Podcasts or Video Gallery. You can also enter the website from pilpodcast.com. Thank you for listening to another episode of Profiles in Leadership. To listen to all my interviews, subscribe to Profiles in Leadership with Steve Anderson on Apple Podcasts, iTunes, and many other popular podcast platforms. Some of these interviews are on video, and you can search YouTube for Profiles in Leadership with Steve Anderson. You can also access the entire library of interviews on my website, orange.coaching.com, and that is orangetheword.coaching.com, and go to the Media Center and click on Podcasts or Video Gallery. You can also enter the website from pilpodcast.com.